Why you feel tired all the time. The exhaustion of your nervous system. The tiredness that sleep cannot fix. It is a particular kind of tired, not the tiredness that arrives after a long day of physical work, the satisfying, earned heaviness that leads to deep sleep and a body restored by morning. Not even the tiredness of a bad night, or a difficult week, or a season of unusual stress. This is something else entirely. Something that does not respond to sleep the way tiredness is supposed to. Something that is there before the day begins, and still there when the day ends, waiting, faithful as a shadow. People who carry this exhaustion often describe it in language that sounds almost apologetic. I don't know why I'm so tired. I didn't even do that much today. I should have more energy than this. They qualify it before anyone else can question it. They preemptively defend against the accusation, voiced or unvoiced, that the tiredness is somehow chosen, a sign of weakness or laziness, or insufficient gratitude for a life that offers no obvious reason for such depletion. But the body does not lie, and the body, when it is exhausted in this particular, persistent, unexplainable way, is communicating something precise. It is communicating that something other than physical exertion has been consuming its resources. This is the exhaustion of a nervous system that has been working overtime, not for days or weeks, but often for years. A system that learned, somewhere along the way, that the world required vigilance, that safety was not a given, but a condition to be continuously monitored and maintained. That something, emotional, relational, environmental, might shift at any moment, and that the body needed to be ready when it did, and so it stayed ready. It stayed in a state of quiet, continuous activation, that low-level hum of alertness that sits just beneath the surface of daily life. It monitored, it anticipated, it processed, not just the events of the present, but the emotional undercurrents of every room, every relationship, every interaction. It held, silently and without acknowledgement, the weight of feelings that were never fully expressed and experiences that were never fully processed. And all of that, the monitoring, the anticipating, the holding, has a metabolic cost. The nervous system is not metaphor. It is biology. It runs on real resources. And when those resources are continuously directed toward vigilance and stress management rather than restoration and regeneration, the system begins to run on something closer to fumes. The body still shows up, still moves through the day, still meets its obligations, often quite ably. But underneath the functioning, something is quietly depleted in ways that ordinary rest does not replenish. There are specific signatures to this kind of exhaustion that many people recognize, often with a relief that comes from finally being seen. Waking up tired, regardless of sleep duration. The sense of heaviness that arrives with morning, before any reason for it exists. Difficulty concentrating, not from lack of intelligence or interest, but from a mind that has been processing at high intensity for so long that a sustained focus feels like too much to ask. Emotional flatness, the blunting of feeling that occurs when the system has been managing too much emotion for too long, a kind of interior grayness that is sometimes mistaken for depression, but is, more precisely, depletion. Irritability at small things. The disproportionate response to a noise, a request, a minor inconvenience. That comes from a system with no buffer left. Social exhaustion after interactions that others seem to find energizing. The deep, specific fatigue that arrives after having to perform okayness for an extended period of time. Persistent question, why am I like this? What is wrong with me? Nothing is wrong. The system is responding exactly as it was trained to respond, exactly as it had to respond, in whatever environment first taught it that the world required this level of preparation. The exhaustion is not a malfunction, it is a message, one that has been sending itself, patiently and persistently, for a very long time, and it is finally worth listening to. When the body learned to stay ready, the nervous system does not arrive in the world already calibrated for chronic vigilance. It arrives open, responsive, designed in its most natural state to move fluidly between activation and rest, between the alertness required by challenge and the recovery required by safety. Emotionally predictable environment, this rhythm sustains itself naturally. Stress arrives, the system responds, the threat resolves, the system settles. This is the biological design. But the design assumes a certain kind of environment, one where safety is the baseline and stress is the exception, one where the caregiving environment is consistent enough, predictable enough, emotionally regulated enough, that the child's developing nervous system learns to trust that rest is safe, that lowering the guard, even briefly, will not result in harm. Many nervous systems never learned this. For some, the environment of early childhood was marked by genuine unpredictability, not necessarily dramatic trauma, though for some, trauma was present and real. But the quieter, more diffuse unpredictability of a household where the emotional temperature was unreliable, where a parent's mood determined the safety of the space in ways the child could not predict or control, where conflict was frequent, or where conflict was suppressed but felt, the tension that lives in the walls of a home where things are fine on the surface and something unspoken hums beneath. A child in this environment cannot afford to fully relax, because relaxation requires the belief that nothing requires vigilance right now, and in an unpredictable emotional environment, the child never quite has that evidence. So the nervous system stays partially activated, keeps one part of its attention always allocated toward reading the room, toward the micro-signals of parental mood, the slight change in atmosphere that precedes conflict, the need to adjust quickly when the emotional weather shifts. This is not a disorder. It is a completely appropriate adaptation to an unpredictable environment. The child who learns to read the room accurately is safer than the child who doesn't. The vigilance protects. The problem is not that it developed. The problem is that it often never receives the signal to stand down. There are also the origins that come from being required, too young, to carry too much. The child who becomes the emotional caretaker of a parent, who learns to monitor the adult's feelings and manage their own carefully so as not to add to the burden. The oldest sibling who holds responsibility disproportionate to their years. The child in a household where significant stress, financial, relational, health-related, created an atmosphere of sustained, ambient anxiety that the child absorbed and internalized as their own baseline. These children grow up with nervous systems that have been running at high capacity for a very long time. They are often extraordinarily capable, responsible, perceptive, emotionally intelligent in ways that impress the adults around them. What goes unseen is the cost. The continuous output of energy that ordinary childhood is supposed to preserve for development, play, rest. There are also the origins that come not from chaos, but from chronic emotional suppression. The child who learned that certain emotions, anger, sadness, need, fear, were not acceptable in their environment. Who learned to process those emotions inward rather than outward? Who became skilled at appearing calm and composed, while internally managing significant emotional activation? It has a precise physiological cost. The sustained effort of suppressing emotional expression requires the nervous system to maintain a kind of permanent tension, a holding, a constant background effort of keeping things contained. That effort, multiplied across years and decades, produces a particular brand of exhaustion, one that is not about activity at all, but about the continuous labor of internal management, of being, always, your own emotional regulator, your own container, your own safety system, because the external environment could not be relied upon to provide any of those things. The body remembers all of this. It carries the record of every environment that required it to stay ready, in the resting tension of the muscles, in the breath that never quite reaches its full depth, in the sleep that does not restore, because the system never fully disengages its sentinel function, even in unconsciousness. The weariness is not weakness. It is the evidence of how long and how hard the body has been working, without acknowledgement, without relief, without being given permission to finally, safely rest. The science of a system that never rests. The autonomic nervous system is one of the most elegant and consequential systems in the human body. It operates beneath conscious awareness, governing heartbeat, breath, digestion, immune response, and the fundamental physiological state that underlies every moment of experience. And at its center is a dynamic tension between two branches, each with a distinct and essential function. The sympathetic nervous system is the system of activation, of mobilization. It is what prepares the body to respond to threat, accelerating the heart, releasing adrenaline and cortisol, directing blood away from digestion and toward the large muscles, sharpening attention and narrowing focus. It is what is commonly called the fight or flight response, and it is a marvel of biological engineering, capable of transforming the body's resources with extraordinary speed in the face of genuine danger. The parasympathetic nervous system is the system of restoration, of recovery, digestion, immune function, cellular repair. It is the state in which the body processes the events of the day, consolidates memory, regulates emotion, and regenerates the resources that activation consumed. In a healthy, regulated nervous system, these two branches work in rhythm, activation when required, restoration when safe. The system moves between states fluidly, guided by accurate assessment of the environment. But what happens when the sympathetic system is chronically engaged, when the body has been living in a state of sustained activation for months or years, without adequate recovery between cycles? The research is unambiguous, and it is sobering. Neuroscientist and stress researcher Robert Sapolsky has documented extensively what chronic stress does to the body and brain over time. Sustained cortisol elevation, the hormonal signature of prolonged stress activation, damages the hippocampus, the brain region central to memory and learning. It dysregulates the immune system, increasing susceptibility to illness. It disrupts sleep architecture, impairing the deep, slow-wave sleep stages where physical and neural restoration actually occur. And it creates a feedback loop, because impaired sleep elevates cortisol further, which impairs sleep further. A cycle that can become self-sustaining in ways that ordinary rest cannot interrupt. Psychiatrist Stephen Porges expanded understanding of the autonomic nervous system considerably with his development of polyvagal theory. Porges identified a third state, beyond fight or flight, and the restorative parasympathetic, which he called the dorsal vagal state. This is the state of shutdown, of collapse, the body's last resort response, when activation has been sustained, beyond the system's capacity to maintain it. The dorsal vagal state produces the specific signature of depletion that many chronically exhausted people recognize immediately: the flatness, the disconnection, the inability to feel genuinely motivated or emotionally engaged, the sense of going through the motions of life without inhabiting it fully. It is not depression in the clinical sense, though it resembles it closely. It is the nervous system in a state of conservative shutdown. Having run the sympathetic system for too long, it has retreated into the minimum viable mode of functioning. Porges also identified what he called the social engagement system, parasympathetic nervous system that activates specifically in the presence of felt safety and genuine social connection. This system, when engaged, produces the physiological signature of true rest, not just the absence of threat, but the active experience of being safe, seen, and connected. For someone whose nervous system has been in chronic activation, this system is often significantly suppressed, not because they don't want connection, but because the nervous system has learned, through repeated experience, to assess even apparently safe environments through a filter of vigilance. The system that is designed to enable rest through connection cannot fully engage when the threat detection system never fully disengages. There is also the research on allostatic load, the cumulative physiological cost of chronic stress exposure. Researchers Bruce McEwen and Teresa Seaman developed this concept to describe what happens to the body when the stress response is repeatedly activated without adequate recovery. The immune system becomes dysregulated. Inflammatory markers elevate. The cardiovascular system is strained. Sleep, metabolism, and hormonal systems are disrupted. The body, in other words, is not built for continuous activation. It is built for rhythm, for the oscillation between effort and recovery that characterizes a regulated life. When that rhythm is interrupted, when the activation is sustained and the recovery is chronically insufficient, the cost accumulates in the body, ways that are, eventually, measurable. The tiredness that sleep cannot fix is, at its biological root, this accumulation. It is the body communicating, with increasing insistence, that the rhythm has been broken for too long, that the system requires not just sleep, but genuine physiological felt safety. Not rest from doing, rest from vigilance. The hidden labor nobody counts. There is a kind of work that does not appear on any list. It does not clock in or clock out. It produces no visible output. It earns no recognition and receives no acknowledgement because most of the people around the person doing it have no idea it is happening. Sometimes the person doing it has no idea either. So seamlessly has it been integrated into the background of daily existence that it registers not as labor, but simply as the texture of being alive. This is the hidden labor of a dysregulated nervous system, and it is, in terms of sheer energetic output, among the most expensive activities a human being can engage in. Consider hypervigilance, the continuous, largely automatic process of monitoring the environment for potential threat. For someone whose nervous system learned early that danger could arrive without warning, this monitoring never fully stops. It runs in the background of every interaction, every room, every relationship. It reads faces for signs of displeasure. It passes tone for changes in emotional temperature. It tracks the subtle shifts in atmosphere that most people never consciously register. It maintains, at all times, a kind of peripheral emotional sonar, always scanning, always processing, always prepared to adjust. This is not a choice. It is a trained automatic function, and it consumes an enormous amount of neurological resources. Resources that, in a more regulated system, would be available for focus, for creativity, for genuine rest. There is also the labor of emotional suppression. For many people with chronically activated nervous systems, the ability to feel and express emotion freely was never fully safe. So emotion, particularly the difficult emotions, the ones that are inconvenient or threatening or likely to produce unwanted responses from others, is processed internally rather than expressed outwardly. It is held, managed, contained. The physiological research on emotional suppression is unambiguous. Actively suppressing emotional expression does not reduce the underlying physiological activation that the emotion produces. The body still generates the full stress response associated with the emotion. Cardiovascular activation, the cortisol release, the muscular tension. What suppression prevents is the discharge of that activation through expression. So the energy of the emotion stays in the body, held in place by muscular effort, maintained by neural resources, generating a sustained internal tension that has nowhere to go. Multiply this across a day, across a week, across years of a life in which the full emotional range is routinely compressed into what is acceptable to express. The result is a body that is always, at some level, holding something, a system perpetually doing the work of containment. And the exhaustion of containment, of being a vessel that never empties, is a specific and profound kind of depletion. Then there is the labor of masking, the performance of being okay when the internal reality is something very different. The energy required to produce a socially acceptable surface presentation, calm, capable, fine, while the internal state is one of anxiety, grief, overwhelm, or depletion. This performance is not dishonest, exactly. It is often simply the safest available option. The learned conclusion that the full truth of one's internal experience is not welcome, not safe to share, not something others are equipped to receive, but performing a different state than the one being experienced is, neurologically, significant labor. The brain must simultaneously process the real internal state and generate the performance of a different one. Both processes draw on limited cognitive and physiological resources. And then there is what might be called relational labor, the continuous, often unconscious work of managing the emotional dynamics of the important relationships in one's life, the monitoring of others' emotional states, the anticipation of needs, the careful calibration of one's own behavior to prevent conflict, soothe tension, maintain harmony. This labor, performed primarily by people who learned early that relational safety required vigilance, is invisible in its execution and exhausting in its accumulation. The inner conflict at the center of this pattern is this. The person doing all of this hidden labor often has no framework for understanding why they are so tired, because nothing happened today, because they didn't do anything particularly demanding, because from the outside, and even, sometimes, from the inside, the day looks ordinary. What is not visible is the full accounting, the hours of background processing, the energy of suppression and monitoring, and performance and relational management. When added to the visible demands of ordinary life, the total output is staggering. And this is before accounting for the cost of simply living with a nervous system in chronic activation. The way anxiety itself burns through resources that would otherwise fund recovery, focus, joy. The conflict deepens when the tiredness is met by others or by the internal critic, with the suggestion that more discipline is required, more sleep hygiene, more exercise, more gratitude, more effort to feel better, when what is actually required is something entirely different. Not more output, less unacknowledged labor, not more doing, recognition of what is already being done, invisibly, continuously, at enormous and uncounted cost. The permission to put it down there comes a moment, not dramatic, often barely perceptible, when the body simply refuses, not in a way that looks like refusal from the outside. No collapse, no breakdown, no visible signal that anything has changed. Just a quiet, internal stopping. A place that is reached, finally, where the familiar effort of carrying everything, the vigilance, the monitoring, the performance, the suppression, becomes more than the system can sustain. And something, almost despite itself, begins to let go. For many people, this moment arrives not as a crisis, but as an exhaustion so complete that even the effort of maintaining the pattern becomes impossible. The hypervigilance that has run for so long on the fuel of its own urgency runs out of urgency. The performance of okayness becomes too costly to produce. The body, in its deep and patient wisdom, begins to communicate what it has been trying to say for a very long time. I cannot keep doing this. I was never meant to keep doing this. This is the turning point. And it is, despite how it feels, like failure, like weakness, like the thing that was most feared, actually a form of profound biological intelligence. The system is not breaking down, it is breaking through, towards something it has needed, perhaps for a very long time, and was never given permission to reach. The realization that tends to accompany this moment is both simple and, for some people, genuinely revolutionary. The vigilance was not protecting against anything that still exists. This requires sitting with, because the vigilance feels protective. It feels like the reason things are okay, like the alertness and monitoring and preparation are what stand between the person and some unnamed but deeply felt danger, and in the environment where they were formed, they were. The child who learned to read the room was safer for that skill. The person who learned to manage their emotions carefully was navigating a real situation that required careful management, but the original environment is not the current one. And the nervous system, which does not distinguish between past and present, which operates on pattern rather than context, has been applying a historical response to a present that no longer requires it. The vigilance is protecting against a threat that has already passed. This is the insight that changes things. Not immediately, not completely, because insight alone does not regulate a nervous system, but it creates something essential, a small gap between the automatic response and the present moment, a space where the question can be asked, is this actually necessary right now? Is this situation genuinely requiring what I am giving it? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the current environment does contain real demands that require attention and care. But very often, with honest examination, the answer is that the current moment is safer than the body is treating it. That the room is not threatening in the way it is being processed. That the relationship is more stable than the monitoring suggests. That the feeling of impending disruption is a memory, not a forecast. This is a profound and disorientating discovery for many people, because the fear has been so ever-present, so much a part of the background of experience, that its absence, even briefly, feels strange. Like something is wrong, like something is being missed. The nervous system, habituated to vigilance, can experience the absence of threat as itself threatening. Rest can feel unsafe. Stillness can produce anxiety. The dropping of the guard can trigger the very alarm it was meant to prevent. This is not failure. It is the predictable response of a system that has not yet learned that the threat has passed. That the work of protection, so long and faithfully performed, is no longer the most important thing. What is most important, now, is something the system has perhaps never been fully allowed to do: rest. Genuinely. At the level of the nervous system itself, not the rest of sleep, which, in a chronically activated system, is often shallow and incompletely restorative. The rest of actual physiological safety, of the body finally, tentatively, receiving the message that no further vigilance is required, that the monitoring can pause, that the holding can loosen, that the weight that has been carried, faithfully and alone, for so long, can, at last, be put down. This permission is not granted by circumstances. Circumstances will always offer new material for the vigilant mind to process. The permission is an internal act, a choice, not easy, not made once, but made repeatedly, to believe that the present moment is safe enough, that rest is not a risk, that the body, finally, is allowed to stop preparing and simply be. Teaching the body that it is safe healing a chronically activated nervous system is not a mental exercise. It cannot be thought into resolution. The mind can understand, with perfect clarity, that the original threat has passed, and the body will continue its vigilance regardless, because the body does not speak the language of cognitive understanding. It speaks the language of experience, of sensation, of the accumulated evidence of repeated moments in which safety was actually felt, not just concluded. This is why healing at the nervous system level requires a different kind of approach than most people expect. Not insight alone, though insight matters. Not willpower, though intention plays a role. What is required is something more embodied, more patient, more fundamentally gentle than either of those. What is required is the repeated, lived experience of safety. Stephen Porges, whose polyvagal theory identified the social engagement system as the primary pathway to genuine physiological regulation, has emphasized that the nervous system heals in relationship, not in isolation, not through discipline or self-improvement programs, but in the presence of other regulated nervous systems, in the experience of being with another person, or in a space that the body genuinely assesses as safe, where the threat detection system can, even briefly, disengage, and where the social engagement system, the one associated with genuine rest and connection, can come online. This is why certain experiences carry such disproportionate restorative power. The conversation with a person in whose presence the guard drops without effort. The environment, a particular place in nature, a certain quality of light, a familiar and loved space, where the body exhales in a way it rarely does elsewhere. The creative practice that absorbs attention so completely that the monitoring mind quiets. These are not luxuries. They are, for a nervous system in need of regulation, medicine. Breath is among the most accessible and powerful tools available for direct nervous system intervention. The connection between respiratory pattern and autonomic state is direct and bidirectional, meaning that the breath both reflects, influences the state of the nervous system. Slow, deep, extended exhalation specifically activates the parasympathetic branch, the restorative system, by stimulating the vagus nerve, the primary pathway through which the brain and body communicate about safety. This is not abstract. The extended exhale, breathing out for longer than the inhale, is a direct signal to the nervous system that threat has passed, that the body can begin to recover. Practiced consistently, it begins to shift the baseline activation level over time. Movement, particularly rhythmic, bilateral movement such as walking, has been consistently shown in both clinical and neuroscientific research, support nervous system regulation. Not intense exercise, which for some chronically activated systems actually functions as additional stressor rather than relief, but the steady, patterned rhythm of movement that engages both sides of the body and produces a gentle, oscillating activation and recovery that begins to teach the system the rhythm it may never have learned, that activation is followed by rest, that the cycle completes. Body-based therapeutic approaches, somatic experiencing, developed by Peter Levine, MD, sensory motor psychotherapy, work specifically with the body's stored stress activation rather than with narrative or cognition. They help the system complete the physiological cycles that were interrupted by chronic stress, allowing the energy of unresolved activation to discharge, gradually and safely, from the body rather than continuing to be held. This discharging is often described by people who experience it as profound, not dramatic, often subtle, a trembling, a wave of unexpected emotion, a deep breath that arrives unbidden, but deeply relieving, like something that was held too tightly for too long, finally releasing its grip. There is also the essential and often underestimated practice of reducing the hidden labor that continuously drains the system. This means learning to recognize hypervigilance in real time, to notice when the monitoring is running, when the scanning is occurring, when the body is preparing for a threat that is not actually present, and to practice, gently and without self-criticism, redirecting that energy, grounding attention in the sensory present, what is actually here, actually safe, actually real in this moment, rather than in the anticipatory landscape where vigilance lives. It means practicing the tolerance of genuine rest, because for a nervous system accustomed to activation, the experience of quiet can trigger anxiety, the uneasy feeling that inactivity is dangerous, that something is being missed, that the stillness cannot be trusted. Learning to tolerate this feeling, to breathe through it rather than immediately filling the space with the familiar noise of doing, is a practice, one that builds, incrementally, the body's capacity to inhabit peace rather than merely visit it. And it means, perhaps above all, allowing the body to be nourished by genuine safety, rather than continuously testing every environment for danger. It is not the abandonment of appropriate discernment. It is the gradual, earned ability to distinguish between environments that are genuinely threatening and those that are simply unfamiliar, to allow the nervous system to update its assessments based on present evidence rather than historical pattern. The body learns safety the same way it learns everything, through repetition, through the accumulated experience of moments in which safety was real and rest was taken and nothing terrible followed. One moment at a time, the rest you were always allowed to take. The body has been trying to tell this story for a very long time. In the weariness that arrives without reason, in the sleep that does not restore, in the tension that lives in the shoulders and the jaw, and the breath that never quite reaches its full depth, in the exhaustion that accumulates quietly, persistently, in the spaces between all the things that are being managed and held and monitored and maintained. It has been telling the story faithfully, in the only language it has available. And the story it has been telling is not one of weakness. It is one of extraordinary, sustained, largely invisible effort. The effort of a system that learned, in an environment that required it, to never fully lower its guard, to stay ready, to hold everything carefully, to be, at all times, prepared for whatever came next. That system worked. It protected. It adapted. It made survival possible in conditions that required more than a body was designed to give indefinitely. It deserves, at last, to be honored for that. Not fixed, not overcome, not shamed into a different configuration by the suggestion that the tiredness is a failure of discipline or attitude or effort, but honored for the faithfulness of its service, for the length of time it sustained itself on resources that should have been replenished far earlier, for the quiet heroism of a body that continued to show up, day after day, carrying more than it was built to carry alone, and then, gently, offered something different, the message it has been waiting, perhaps for a very long time, to receive. The threat has passed. The watching can stop. The holding can loosen. The preparation can pause. You are safe now. Not because the world has become perfectly safe. It hasn't. But because the danger that required this level of readiness is no longer present. Because the environment that trained the vigilance is no longer the environment you inhabit. Because you are no longer the small person who had to carry this alone, in a situation that gave you no other option. You are here now, in a present that, however imperfect, does not require everything from you at every moment. You are allowed to rest. There is a particular quality of rest that becomes available when the nervous system begins to genuinely regulate, when the system finally, tentatively, receives the message that safety is real. It is not the rest of sleep, though sleep deepens. It is something more pervasive, a quality of being in the body rather than monitoring it, of inhabiting the present moment rather than perpetually preparing for the next one, of breathing all the way in and all the way out without the subtle resistance of held tension. It feels, to people who encounter it for the first time, or the first time in a very long time, almost foreign, like a country they have heard described but never visited, like the quiet after a long noise they had stopped noticing as noise. And then, slowly, it begins to feel like home. Rest is not a reward for productivity. It is not earned through sufficient output, or granted to those who have managed everything well enough. It is a biological necessity, as fundamental as food, as water, as air, a need that does not require justification or proof of worthiness. The exhaustion was real, the hidden labor was real. The cost of a life lived in sustained vigilance was real and significant, and it deserves to be fully acknowledged before it is released. But the release is possible, not through force, not through discipline, not through any of the familiar strategies of pushing through or managing better or trying harder, through something far simpler and far more difficult: the willingness to stop, to allow the body to be exactly where it is, to let the breath move without direction, to trust, even for a moment, that nothing terrible will happen if the monitoring pauses, to receive, for once, without having to earn it first. The rest was always there, available in every ordinary moment that was too busy being survived to be inhabited. It is still there now, quiet, patient, unhurried, waiting, as it has always been waiting, for the simple act of finally being chosen. Put it down. The body remembers how to rest. It has only been waiting for permission. You have always been allowed to be tired. You have always been allowed to stop. The world will not end in the quiet. It will simply, finally, let you breathe.